127 Pets, Chapter 7. Final 7 hours. Author's note. Warning, this chapter is extremely graphic and might be disturbing for some viewers. The next day. Rainbow hadn't slept at all. She had been awake all night, too dehydrated or too in pain for sleep. This was it. She was just mere hours from death. Rainbow stared down at the boulder, her wing purple and her face pale. Whenever she would move around, her muscles would only cause late responses. Rainbow's lower body was figuratively dead, and the ache in her neck wouldn't stop. But after such a long wait, after being pinned down in the depths of Ghastly Gorge for over 5 days, something in her foggy brain kicked in. There was nothing more powerful than the will to live. Rainbow shakily grabbed the strong rubber rope. She tied it tightly to the upper part of her dead wing, so tight till she felt the numbness in her muscles and she couldn't pull any more. Rainbow got up, bending her body to one side as her wing bent the other way. Her breaths came out short and low as she put pressure on her wing, twisting it with most of the strength she had left. In a lightning-fast second, a painful snap whipped through her body. Rainbow fell over, panting heavily. She lay there for a few agonizing seconds before getting back up. Rainbow slowly filled her wing. It felt like mush. After clearing her eyes, Rainbow shook her head. She had just broken a bone, but only one out of the 2. Rainbow, while struggling, went back to her twisting position. Putting pressure on her grounded wing, Rainbow pulled. She gritted her teeth, pulling with all her might. This last bone was harder than the previous one. Ugh, she began grunting quietly. After the painful moment, another one, even more painful, snapped. The last bone in her wing broke, causing a ringing feeling through her flanks. Rainbow shook her head violently. She screamed, trying to substitute the pain with laughter. Only half of it worked. After feeling her wing, Rainbow grabbed the now sharp knife. She placed the wooden handle of the tool in her mouth, ignoring the mucus which accumulated in her saliva. She brought the blade close to the rotten flesh of her wing, the tip just touching it. She turned the knife, roughly sliding it across the skin, causing a thin, red opening. Rainbow sucked on her teeth, letting out moans of disturbance. All Rainbow could do was mumble to herself, every once in a while clenching her eyes closed. She buried the knife into her wing, feeling the strings of muscle being wounded. She lightly whipped out the blade. A small puddle of dark blood formed underneath the wing. "Oh, come on!" Rainbow had blood on her mouth, sucking some of it off her wing to keep hydration. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. Rainbow just stayed there, cutting away at the dull skin and feather of her pinned wing. Every few minutes she would dig her muzzle at the growing wound, pulling out pieces of flesh that hung loosely. While it felt like her wings were burning, she learned to ease down the pain. A mixture of blood and drool dripped down her chin, digging her hooves in it to remove any dead string of muscle. Noticing her wing was getting lighter, Rainbow reached for the rubber string, pulling on it even tighter than before. After a few more minutes of digging deep, Rainbow noticed a white, thin string visible inside her wing. It looked like dental floss, though a bit darker. She brought the tip of her knife close to the thin strand of possible flesh. The moment the metal blade hit the white string, an extremely loud buzzing noise shot through Rainbow's ears, almost causing her to go deaf. She flung back, nearly dropping the knife as she screamed in pain. Rainbow had just touched a nerve, a very sensitive part of the body. Her teeth clenched tightly, so tightly that they looked as if they were about to break. With weak eyes, Rainbow lowered a hoof back to the thin nerve. The moment she pulled on it, her entire body gave a short spasm. The buzzing in her ears was just as loud as before, and it lasted several seconds. Time seemed to slow down as Rainbow tried again to pull off the nerve. It was the only way to cut through the rest of the skin. Minutes upon minutes went by, Rainbow nearly passing out after each try. She screamed and whimpered and almost gave up. She brought her shaky knife back to the undamaged nerve. Sweat shot out of the back of her neck. Her breathing was too ragged to be normal, and in one quick swoop, Rainbow brought the blade down hard. The knife slashed through the nerve, and Rainbow screamed louder than she had ever in her life. The constant buzzing in her head nearly killed her. Everything seemed to get darker. Rainbow had a terrible expression. Drool kept pouring out of her mouth as black blood stained her teeth. The moment she was about to pass out, she slapped herself hard, trying to stay awake. If she dropped now, she would die. Rainbow began to cry, though without any actual tears coming through her eyes. Her breathing became desperate as she slowly got back up. With a hint of courage left in her, Rainbow growled. She went back to cutting through the skin. "Don't pass out, Rainbow Dash. Don't pass out." Only she could encourage herself to keep going. Many more horrible minutes flew by. Rainbow yelled, grunted, growled, begged, and at some points nearly stopped breathing. All she did was stab and jab, cutting and slicing. Every strand of muscle ripped to the side. Blood dried up everywhere in the area. After a few more moments of pain, Rainbow gave one final cut, ripping her wing off completely. Rainbow fell back, breathing heavily as she looked up into the sky. Her head slowly looked forward, seeing a boulder on top of a dead piece of leathery flesh. She made her way to the gray bag, wrapping it around her amputated area. Rainbow grabbed all of her stuff, though this process took a few more minutes. Then she walked out of the crevice with a wrapped-up stub on her side and only walking on 3 weak legs. Rainbow wasn't sure if she was going to make it very far. Eventually, she made it out of the collapsed walls. Standing on a rocky hill, Rainbow looked beyond the setting sun. She hadn't seen it for so long. Her mouth was shaking. The dehydrated Pegasus found a dirty puddle of water on the ground. Being in her state, Rainbow dug her face into it, absorbing the filthy water down her throat. After many stumbles, she finally tried to make it back to Ponyville. I'm a little woozy. Chapter 8. End. In a green, sprawling field in the wilderness stood a picnic. The traditional red and white cloth lay flat on the wet grass with sandwiches, fruits, and vegetables covering it. 5 specific ponies were eating together, talking about their day. Rarity, Twilight, Pinkie, Applejack, and Fluttershy. They haven't seen Rainbow in over 5 days. They were used to it, though. Rainbow always left to go out on some crazy adventure for a week or 2. "Have any y'all seen Rainbow Dash lately?" Applejack finally asked. They all shrugged. Twilight responded, "I'm afraid not. In fact, Rainbow hasn't been around in over 5 days. Should we be worried?" "I reckon she's on some crazy adventure. She'll be back in a jiffy," Applejack reassured. "If I might bring something up," Rarity started. "She never told us where she is going. Should we send her a letter?" "You know what I think?" Pinkie blurted out, jumping in front of the picnic format. "I think she's planning a big super-duper surprise party for us. It's gonna be fun, fun, fun!" They all rolled their eyes, remembering Pinkie's usual hyperactive behavior. Fluttershy was the last to speak. "Well, I bet she's having a great time right now," they all agreed. After a few more minutes passed by, an odd shape became noticeable in the distance. Twilight was the first to see this, narrowing her eyes down the grassy horizon. It was some kind of figure, and it seemed to be getting bigger. Girls?" Twilight got her friends' attention, who all looked at her general direction. For a few seconds, they kept looking at the figure in the distance. As it got closer, they noticed how horrid it looked. It was dragging itself, probably sick or injured, and just gave them a sad, cold feeling. Fluttershy was the first to notice. It was Rainbow Dash. They all watched in confusion, in shock, with a bit of horror. Their Pegasus friend looked horrible, like she had just fought an entire army of Timberwolves. She also had some kind of gray cloth wrapped around her left wing. It was dark red, dried with blood. She had bags under her eyes, purple and red from pain and exhaustion. Eventually, Rainbow fell flat on her face. "Rainbow!" Twilight yelled. She and her friends rushed up to the fallen Pegasus. They all gathered around Rainbow, Fluttershy helping her up. She couldn't believe the state she was in. It was awful. Each and every one of them developed tears in their eyes. "Rainbow Dash," Rarity started in a voice full of emotion. "What in Equestria has happened to you?" Rainbow's mouth was shaking. All she saw were colorful blurs on top of her. "Please," she begged in a desperate tone. "Water." Upon hearing this, Pinkie Pie took out a bottle of water, popped off the lid, and gave it to Rainbow. "Please drink quick." They all noticed how dehydrated she was. The almost dying Pegasus quickly took the bottle and poured all the cold liquid down her throat. This lasted for a few audible seconds. Only the sound of loud gulping could be heard. After, Rainbow dropped the bottle to her side. All her friends had rays of water down their cheeks. Rainbow simply closed her eyes, still having grief upon her face, although she gave a very light smile, knowing that her friends were there. In that moment, Rainbow's heart stopped beating. She lay motionless. "Rainbow Dash." Applejack held an ear to Rainbow's chest after many painfully long seconds. She stood back. Applejack took off her hat, her eyes drooping down with tears. "I'm sorry, y'all." That was it. Rainbow just didn't move. Too much stress to her heart and brain killed her. Her coat became darker as gray clouds swirled in the sky. They all sobbed over their friends as the sky grew darker. Rainbow finally died. This was the last 127 hours of her life. 5 days full of misery and grief, and just tears. It was now over. The end.